Our group, the Hot Peppers, is proud to present our slideshow on division. In our group, we have Ashley, Aurora, Megan, and Vanessa. To start, let's dive into what division is. Division is simply the sharing or dividing up of a set quantity into equal groups. Every division problem has 4 parts to it, which are the dividend, the divisor, the quotient, and the remainder. In some cases, when there are no leftovers after dividing, then the quotient would have a remainder of 0. Whether the division problem is simple or complex, division is a topic crucial to our growth in mathematics. Students first develop the basic idea of division before entering school as they learn and develop the concept of equal sharing. When first introduced in school, students learn it based upon their knowledge of other basic math operations such as addition, subtraction, and multiplication. Moving into secondary education, those basic concepts are advanced and applied to the use of fractions and rational numbers. The progression is crucial because it allows for students to make applications into more complex mathematical problems and equations as they practice various math courses in furthering their education. Students are then able to connect the process and concepts of division to their everyday lives, whether it be in jobs or cooking, and etc. Understanding how something works is called procedural understanding. But if a student only knows how to solve a problem, but they cannot explain why it works, then they are more likely to forget how to do the procedure. Conceptual knowledge is important to the development of procedural fluency. Students must identify the key differences between division and multiplication. Division is about separating sets, and multiplication is about combining sets. Another thing to keep in mind is that teachers should allow their students to use manipulatives to represent their mathematical problems. This will help them make the connection between the process and the written problem. Here's an example of a student demonstrating their ability to solve a division equation. They start by setting up the word problem into an equation with the total number of apples acting as the dividend and the number of friends as the divisor. To further illustrate the description of the word problem, the student then draws out the 4 friends and uses dots to represent the number of apples each person would receive. Once the student set this illustration, they determined that each friend would get 5 apples each. The student then returned to the original equation they wrote out and put down 5 as the quotient and included a remainder of 0. A great way to introduce division to students is to start with base 10 blocks. Using either physical base 10 blocks or drawing the blocks out will suffice. To solve the division problem, start by setting up the base 10 blocks so that the divisor represents the length of one side and the dividend is the area. To find the quotient of the equation, count the length of the side adjacent to the divisor. Base 10 blocks allow students to visualize how the quotient is determined in a division problem by building off of the tools they are already familiar with. An addition method to solve division equations is by using a place value chart. This method is useful for transitioning into the standard algorithm. While the place value chart may appear to be complicated at first glance, it is actually quite simple. The place value chart is divided into columns which represents each place value for the dividend. Each column then receives a corresponding value from the dividend, which is then distributed into groups determined by the divisor. Any leftover quantities are then carried into the next column, going from right to left until the quantity is unable to be split evenly. If there are any remaining quantities, then they are referred to as remainders and are written with the letter R next to the quotient. Partial quotient is the next step towards being able to do division. The perks of using partial quotient is that the method builds off of the prior knowledge of the students and shows the relationship division has to multiplication. To use to use this method, begin by coming up with a list of multiplication sentences that involve the divisor. The student can then use repeated subtraction using the information they came up with in their list until they are either unable to subtract equally anymore or they have reached 0. Once this happens, the student can then add up the value outside of the equation to determine the quotient. Any remaining quantity can be written in the same remainder form of the letter R with the residual values. There are a couple of methods for completing long division as well, but the most common form involves a few steps that are used repetitively. You begin by dividing the tens column dividend by the divisor, and then in the next step, you multiply the divisor by the tens place quotient. In the following step, you subtract the product from the divisor and bring down the number in the neighboring column. After that, you repeat the first 3 steps for each place value preceding. There are various ways or methods to go about dividing fractions, but in general, there are only a few simple steps. The first step involves turning the second fraction, also known as the divisor, into a reciprocal by switching the place of the numbers in the numerator and denominator. In the second step, you multiply the dividend and divisor together by multiplying the numerators by each other and then the denominators by each other to result in the quotient. The last step is where you then simplify the quotient. And that concludes our presentation on division.